this talks about how we're going to use what's in context.xml, and then you can access the database. Okay, so I think that's all the plumbing. So I want to show you something now. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but let's stop the server and rerun the server and see if it boots up. It's always a good thing to try every now and then. So this is, I've done my plumbing for the API piece, and now I can see what happens when I boot up the server. So I'm expecting that my database table is still there. But now let's try hitting API categories. This is our first URL that we're going to be implementing, and I just want to see if I get an error or not. I don't. Okay, great. So what we can do is we can hit the API. What's going on is if we, let me just rerun that. What's going on is in terms of what's happening on the network, we are making a request to API categories, and we're getting a response back. It doesn't show it. We're getting a JSON object back. It's just a list of category objects from our database that it's just the categories. So so I guess what I want to say is, how does that work? Let's go on a tiny bit of a code reading exercise just to review how we think that is working. It's sending back real data over the network to my browser. It's all happening on my machine, but it's using the network on my machine. So what we've just done is we've just taken rows out of the database and given them to the browser on demand, basically. So I wanted to mention something about code reading. For this API part of the project, it really would be quite interesting to spend a bit of time reading some code so that you get familiar with things, so that you know sort of the patterns and where to grab things from when you're implementing your part of the API. So I'm going to go on a code reading journey now. And I think that'll help understand what happens. So when the browser makes a request to our API server, it's going to always hit this API resource class first. So this API resource class, it actually lives at /API. We just have to say no extra pieces of path here, please. So it's the parent of everything. It's at /API. And then the code that runs when we say API categories depends on the path attributes, which are all underneath API. So the one that I've highlighted here, API/API/categories, is actually the piece of code that runs. But we've got other pieces of code. If you say categories 1001, that looks like it returns a single category rather than a list of categories. So the structure of the URL that you're asking for determines how you find the code on the server that works, or that's running in response to that request. So let's stick with, let's quickly flip over and say 1001, because I think it's gonna work. See, we can just ask for one category at a time if we want. So you can see how setting things up this way will make life easier for our, hopefully, JavaScript Vue client application. It can ask for what it needs on demand. So let's look into this code for categories. How are we returning this list of categories? So the first thing to notice is all of our data access objects come from a singleton application context instance. That is responsible for building up all these database access objects. But at this level, at the API resource level, where we're first getting into the server, we can just use the data access objects to access objects. We don't need to worry about how that happens. So we are delegating the work here to a data access object called category DAO, and we're asking it to find all categories. So if we look at that, if we dive in by holding down Command, or I think Window, actually I think if we go to Command B, no, Command click, probably Windows click, Control click on Windows, goes to the interface. This shows us everything, all the questions we can ask about categories. So we can find all of them, we can find one by a number, and we're going to be building one to find by name. But let's have a look at the code inside find all. So if we click down into the interface, this is now in a class called category DAO JDBC. Notice we're in the category, we're in the business category section. This business logic of how to find all categories, it's going to be pretty common to all APIs. So we just separated it out into a different package. But what it's doing here is it's getting a connection to the database, but it's doing it and then I'll explain what the try is in a minute. We're getting a connection to the database, and then we're saying, okay, look, we're going to run the following statement over that connection to the database, and we're going to execute that statement and get a result set back. These are all objects that are in the JDBC specification, the Java database something specification. I can't remember what it stands for. It's very commonly used, so commonly that I've forgotten it. I'll get back to you on that. So the idea is you connect over the network to a database, build up a statement, and then execute a statement. You get a result set back. So here we're intuitively getting a result set back, and we're going to read a category out of the result set while it's got a next row, basically. You can think of a result set as the rows of results from the database. And we're just storing that into a list of categories and returning the list. If something goes wrong, we are throwing our own bookstore exceptions. The interesting piece here is all of these objects, once you open them, they have to be closed. But we don't need to explicitly call close because we're using what's called a try with resources statement. And if you say try and then you give a list of variables that are instantiated, when we reach the end of the try block, basically whether there's an exception or not, the close operation will be called on each of those variables in reverse. So I think if I'm lucky enough, connection is auto-closable. That means that I can use it inside one of these statements and it will get closed automatically. So it just means less code. I don't have to type down here. I don't have to type connection.close anymore. Or maybe just above, you know, I don't have to do that. Everything gets cleaned up automatically. So it's very nice. That's important when you're dealing with databases because one of the things that can go wrong is if you don't close a connection, you're not giving it back to the connection pool, and eventually you will run out of ability to connect to the database. We set it up so that you can only have about 4 connections to the database because there's so many of you students. We have to control how many connections you can have at a time. And if you don't close your database connections in a framework like this, you'll have an operational problem that might not show up for hours or days, and it'll be hard to track down. So close your resources when you open connections over the network is the name of the game. Okay, how are we doing? All right, so that is the find all code reading. Basically we're going all the way to the database and we're bringing those objects back out. When we get them all, notice that here at the top level, we're just returning a list of category objects. Well, how does that list of category objects turn into what we see in the browser? Right? How does it turn into this? If we look at the raw data, it turns into that raw data over the network. And we haven't written any more code on the server to make that happen. That happens because Jersey picks up the reins and helps us out. So what happens is the Jersey framework gets a list of objects and it says, oh, we are producing JSON output. So what it does is it converts that list by itself into JSON output. But the way it does that is it looks at the list and the list turns into square brackets on the outside. And then it looks at each category object and it looks at all the properties in that category object. So that's called a model object. What it does is it basically looks at all the getters and it runs all the getters and gathers them into name value pairs. So it does all that work and builds a big string and sends it out over the network for you. This is very nice because a lot of work has been done for us. This is why Jersey or any JAX RS implementation does this, is very nice. So you can see that the categories have this value comes by calling get category ID, this value comes by calling get name, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to, so now you know a little bit about how to identify which method is getting called. You look at the path that you're asking for, and then how objects are converted on the way out and all the way down to the database. So I just thought that was a little valuable to walk through. You'll be getting used to that with other API calls. Right, all right, next is, we have a series of to-do items. Thank you, Dr. K. We have a series of to-do items that in the code that we've given you. So I'm going to try looking at what these to-dos look like. Yep, that's about right. 1 in API and 7 in the business package. So I recommend you do this. Just look at the to-dos. We know that we're done. You'll know that you're done with this project when all these to-dos you've deleted. So as you complete an activity, get rid of these to-dos, and then it's a quick way of checking that you're all done. And at the end of the course, I'll take a point off if you leave to-do comments in. So just a good idea to get rid of your to-do. So what are we going to do first?
So could I say one thing? We had issues. All right, this isn't the right file. I was just going to mention some issues. Did we talk about the category model class yet? Or the book model class yet?
Very next thing, Dr. K.
Okay, sorry.
Great segue. So hit shift twice, and I know that I want to edit book.java. Why? Because I can see it here. So I'll just go book.java. It'll take me right there. It's in the business book package. All right. So I'm going to do this a really wild way, Dr. K. I'm going to be lazy. So when we are reading a book back out of the database, we're going to have all these fields. And we want to make sure that all of our model objects follow the same pattern. They're each going to have a field for the fields in our database. So let's have a look at our database while we're here at the books. All right, so if you read across these parameters, they're the same as the columns in the database. Their names have been changed into Java names, but they're the same. That's the idea. So what we want to do is create private fields corresponding to all of them. So I'm just going to copy this line and I'm going to paste it above, end it with a semicolon, and then replace all the commas. Command R to replace all the commas with semicolons. Oops, just undo with Command Z, replace all the commas with semicolons, but it should be only within selection. Why is this?
You were over it. You were over it. It's the lines. No, next one. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, and then basically replace all. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command Option L to reformat code. That should be somewhere under code reformat file. Optimize imports, just the selected text. And that pops them all onto a line. Then I'm going to do something really crazy. I'm going to go into column edit mode. So I'll show you that on the menu. It's edit by columns, column selection mode. And then I'm going to select here, and I'm just going to type the word private once. And then I'm going to get out of column selection mode. And we're back, and we have all our fields ready to go. Then I'm going to get rid of the constructor, and I'm going to generate all the rest of the code. So for me, this is Control Enter, and it says generate a constructor. Select all of those fields and hit return, and you'll get your constructor, which was the same. It's just got all the code written out for you. Then let's do our getters. Let's build all our getters for all these fields. There's a note here in the walkthrough that says, let's just change this to get is public, just to be consistent and avoid a couple of problems later on, because public is a keyword in Java and things get a bit confusing. Okay, then, then it also says generate a toString method. We can do that by generating things as well. You can say generate toString and include info about all of the fields, and we get a nice toString. So that's how we finish our model book class. And let's not do setters. Let's not really make it any more complicated than that, because whenever we read a book class out of the database, we're just going to call this constructor, and that'll work great. So that is the first one of the to-dos. So now I should definitely go ahead and get rid of these comments, because you should be able to read and understand this class later in 6 months' time without any comments. It's not a difficult class to comprehend. And you'll notice we should have 6 items left in 4 files now. Great. I'm going to do a couple of more complicated API methods now, Dr. K, but I'm not going to do all of them. That's the plan. So I guess the next one is...
Sounds good. So one thing that I want to emphasize here is make sure you use these naming conventions that Dr. A used here. Don't do like category ID, like category _ ID or category -ID or something strange like that. Okay, it should be a Java camel case, and we're going to test for that too.
The reason is, as you might imagine now, as we can just see, all of these names turn into bits and pieces of names in the JSON that travels over the network to your client. So students in the past have accidentally named this book with a capital ID. And when that happens and the getter is called, like they would have renamed the method as well. If that happens, suddenly it's book ID with a capital D, and it takes maybe 1.5 modules to work out that they have a problem and what the problem is. And I'll be showing a debugging video later about what happens when that happens, because it really is hard to find, and it lets us see all the debugging strategies that we can. But yeah, just use these names would be my advice. Thank you, Dr. K. That was a great one. All right, so what we've just done is we've just fixed up the book class. So we might get really happy and say, all right, well, let's restart Tomcat. So you don't have to stop and start. You can just hit restart here. And let's restart our Tomcat. What happened here? It's rerunning. And shouldn't we be able to do something with books now? Right, so we can do API categories, right? But shouldn't I be able to do something with books? If I go back to API resource and have a look, shouldn't I be able to say, give me book 1001? Because I just fixed my book model class. So let's try API books 1001. Oh, it didn't work. Well, I guess I wanted to show this because it's a good example of a null pointer exception and how to read these exception screens from Tomcat. So if something goes wrong on your server, Tomcat just blows up and throws you an exception. We're not going to worry about that. You wouldn't want that in production, but it's really nice when you're teaching. So Java basically lets you have exceptions that are nested inside other exceptions. So something may go wrong really low down in your code, throw an exception, then you might wrap that exception in another one and wrap that exception in another one and throw that out over the network. So, the way to read these is, I've got an exception, and this is the top level exception. It's happening basically inside the Jersey servlet container. And it says book lookup by book ID 1001 failed. Well, that's good, but it doesn't really tell us what the root cause is. So that's the outer exception. The next nested exception inside pretty much says the same thing. So this is the Jersey throwing up. This is our API resource method blowing up with an exception. But why did it blow up? So you keep looking down to find the rootest of root causes, basically, the bottommost one usually. And here we have a null pointer exception on line 55 of API resource. What could be going wrong? Well, I know what's going wrong. I didn't read the instructions carefully enough. This happened to me last night. So let's go to line 55 of API resource.java and see what could be null. So API resource, line 55. Okay, can anyone tell me what could be causing the null pointer exception on line 55? Yeah, right. BookDAO is not initialized. I don't think anything else can possibly cause a null pointer exception on that line. So where does BookDAO come from? Have we initialized? Well, it looks like we have. Let's see. We get it from the application context, which is our singleton, and we're returning null. So it looks like we've got a to-do that we better take care of. So add a field and complete the getter for BookDAO. So I'm going to get rid of the getter for BookDAO to start off with. And then I'm going to add a field, private BookDAO. And I'm going to say BookDAO is new BookDAO JDBC, just following the same pattern. And then I'm just going to generate the getter for BookDAO. What's the two related problems to that? I have no idea. Let's think I'm fine. I don't know why it says there's problems. It looks like that might just be frozen on the screen by accident. So, and then look, there's two, I saved and it went away. So save it and things go away if they look like they're stuck. It gives me the option here to make these variables final. There's no problem with doing that. So we can do that. And the reason I knew that was because I'm looking up here at the two warnings. You can click on the warnings and you can show the quick fixes, and you can do it all from here as well, if you like. There's no problem doing that either. Now I've got a nice green check mark. It's not necessary. I've just learned over time to be a little bit paranoid. the wisdom of experience. Let your tools help you. Don't forget to delete the to-do. And let's restart Tomcat and see if we can.
Dr. A, I got a question.
Sure.
You know how we did on the client side, we had, you know, lint on save and it would like reformat everything. Can we do that in Java too? The reason I'm asking is because I notice you have some things that are like not slightly not formatted. I wonder if it will.
You can, well, let's see, we're not using version control, but I'll look into that.
Okay.
I did look into it. I
Just
tried to use Prettier for Java as well. I need to see if there's a plugin. The best answer would be if there's a plugin that lets us do it. These aren't formatted. I'll just show everyone now. If you right click and say Reformat Code, and you optimize imports, don't rearrange entries, but just optimize and clean up code. What that'll do is that'll fix all the classes to respect your editor config, and it'll start using 2 indents instead of 4 everywhere. So that's totally reasonable to do as well. Now we won't get disrupted by that visually, Dr. K. All right. Okay, so we were at the stage of running and seeing if we can ask for a book yet. So let's see if we can ask for a book. API book 1001 books. Okay, so if it's 404, that means it couldn't find the URL that I'm asking for, most likely. So you've usually got a typo, and it's usually something like that. There we go. So we can now get books over the network. So we can get categories, we can get books, things are looking up. So the rest of the assignment is about making sure that we can look up, let's see, we can look up categories by category ID. We can look up random categories. We can look up categories by name. And we can basically ask for some suggested books using category names. So I could say, suggest me some coding books, please, but no more than 2. So that's the rest of the API that we're going to build, and we're going to use it together with our JavaScript clients next module. So let's see how we're doing. All right. Let's go back to IntelliJ. Oops, I mean IntelliJ. All right, so let's do a couple of these to-dos, and I'm going to leave some for everyone's imagination. So let me look at the to-dos. There's a certain order that I approached it in, which was the order that's in the project description. So it's just following the order in the project description and not getting, not jumping around too much. Finish one before moving on to the next, because they do build on each other. The idea here is read the code. What we're asking you to do here is not going to actually be that much code. So if you find yourself writing pages of code to implement these things, something is wrong. And please ask on Piazza. All right. So I'm going to start by implementing find by category ID. So I think that's first. Find by category ID. Find books by category ID. Right. So I'm in the book DAO. So the objects I'm going to return are books. But I want to say, find me all the books, please, in a category 1001. So let's implement this method. The first thing I'm going to do is observe that I think, isn't there something, just going to maybe review the code above it. Like instead of finding by category ID and we're going to find a list of books in a category, it's just worth looking at the code, just to find one book by book ID, just have a look. So we're going to need some SQL and we're going to need to build some statements. and we're going to need to return a list of books. So I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing else in this method here that returns a list of anything, but maybe if I have a look at the category.jdbc, we return a list of categories somewhere here in find all. We just talked about it before. So how does that work? Well, it's like we use a while loop over the result set, and we use a list and we build things up. So why don't I just I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to copy and paste from here, because this has got something like what I need. I'm going to need to be careful when I fix it up, but I'm going to implement this method using this code. It's not right, and things are in red. But what I do need a connection. I need to prepare a statement. I need a result set. I need to loop it. Okay, so I've got a skeleton here. It's wrong, but it's wrong in a way that won't build. So that's good. I can't try to proceed until I fix everything. So then I notice, okay, look, I'm going to need to find all the books in a category using SQL. So again, I'm going to say, well, I do this for a book. I find a book by book ID already here. So, and there's a to-do here that says, hey, let's build a query. So I'm going to cheat again. I'm going to copy this, but now I'm going to fix it up. So this isn't right, because while we are getting all the book information, we are saying where the book ID is something. But the goal here is to say, hey, we're given a category ID. Well, fortunately, if you double check in your database, you'll see that books actually know which category they're in the same table. So I can just say where category ID is, and then the question mark is a placeholder for a value that we set into this query. So I've got something called find by category ID SQL. I want to use that here. So I want to prepare a statement. But now there's another problem. I need to be able to set a value for the category ID in, but I haven't got a pattern here that lets me set something in. It's just, you know, take the statement and run it. And because of this try syntax, I can't actually say, hang on, just give this category ID into this statement, please, and then run it. So I'm going to have to split this up. Oh, check style, I wanted to try and avoid because it's a bit picky, but sure. Thanks, Audrey. All right. Where am I going to steal this from? Let's see. Find by book ID. Right. So if we have a look here, again, just in the method above, you can see that, well, we had this problem before, didn't we? In this method, we needed to set the book ID. So how is it solved here? That's the question. So it was solved by just doing a try for the connection of the statement, then running our set long here to set in the parameter into the SQL, and then doing another try. So let's try to do that. So if we just don't get ourselves too confused. All right, I want to say statement dot set long, and it starts at 1 for JDBC, and I want to pass in the category ID we were given. Then I want to start another try again, and I want to say all of this stuff. And then I probably have to close the first try and then close the method. So you can see I've gone down here to see the yellows. You can see that you've got everything matched up again. So let's just reformat this. You can select a piece of code and say Command Option L, the Windows appears below on the screen, and it looks like it was formatted okay. So now, wouldn't it be nice if there was a read book method? It looks like there is. So, and I know there's some red, I'll get to that, but I just want to finish the idea first. Let's read a book. And instead of calling it a category. Let's just call it a book. And then we can use our books variable that we have up the top to add a book, gather them up, and away we go. So then the question is, why is this red? I think I had the answer to this. Everything looks fine to me. I did this last night. Let's just compare it to the one above. Try, semi, connection, prepare statement. What does it say? Catch clauses. Oh, I need to put a brace there and take that out and reformat. And you'll see that my catch needs to be on the outermost try. This try simply goes from here to here. So this try goes from here to here. And all that does is close the result set when we're done, which is useful. That's why it's there. So you can see by reading around, getting familiar, stealing bits and pieces, you can come up with something that might work. Let's see if it does. So find by category ID. Can we test anything here? We can ask for books by category ID. So API resource has a category ID in the books, which says, give me all the books in category 1001. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to restart our Tomcat server, and I will we had API categories 1001 books. And you see we get all my coding books. So it looks like that works. I think I can probably leave things there.
The only thing I noticed in the BookDAO.
Well, let's see how we're doing in BookDAO.
Or yeah, BookDAO JDBC. The only thing I noticed is let's see, what did you implement? Find my category ID. So let me ask the students, what do you think would be a good error message instead of the one that's there?
Thank you.
What would be a good error message for this one?
What's the bug? I'd call this a bug. I'd call it strongly a bug.
When throwing an exception. Right now we got encounter problem finding books in category. Yeah, that sounds pretty close.
Yeah, you could even go books in category, and then you always put the E first. Oh, did I implement this? Right, you put the message first. You can just say plus category ID if you like, and then it'll give you a nice message. That would be full marks. Because when things go wrong, it's nice to have a nice English sentence, and that's a voice of experience there. It also gives you more things to find out where in the code things have gone wrong. So that is a good warning about the dangers of cut and paste, like I've showed you how to do it, but I don't know.
And if we had prettier checking this, it'd probably probably put a space on either side of that plus, just FYI.
Oh, yeah, sure. That changes by language. So JavaScript does that for a good reason. It's not needed in Java. All right. I think the only other thing I'd mention is eventually you've got a to-do. I think the to-dos in the API here are reasonably straightforward. Please feel free to ask on Piazza if you get into trouble, but the idea is I'll just maybe walk through this one for 1 minute. Here's underneath API, here's what you would type in order to run this method from a browser. And the path param here, the name of it here is by design matches this placeholder here. A query param of limit means that if I'm in a browser, I would type, some HTTP something, and then question mark limit equals 2. Obviously in URL with, something like 1001. So the difference between a path param and a query param is the path param appears in the slashes in the path, and the query param appears after the question mark part of a URL. So the URLs are structured as paths and query parameters. So if you need a query parameter, which you will for this implementation, well, actually you can do one method for both of these. You'll say @query param, and you can use a default value as well. So that means if I leave off the limit, it'll default to 3. And this is all part of the JAX RS Jersey specification. So just because we use Jersey doesn't invalidate all of these. The one other thing I wanted to share very quickly, Dr. K, if we've got a couple of minutes. Maybe I'll just share. There's a way to do testing that's pretty nice, and I'll do a Piazza post about how to test your API. So when you get to the stage of finishing all of the to-dos, how do we test all of those and get some assurance? You can certainly run them all in the browser, but there's a nice way of writing a little test program.
Yeah, in fact, that's probably how we will test at least a portion of this project.
I think we'll use Python probably, but I want to show them the IntelliJ way of doing testing.
True, we'll use Python.
Yep. So I guess I didn't get through a couple of to-dos, didn't get through the testing. If you have questions about implementing these methods, please feel free to ask. I'm responsible for the plain old database framework here, so please do feel free to ask. IntelliJ does have a testing framework. I'll post about it in Piazza for when you're done. And I'll also post, if you've got some spare time, no pressure, there's some ungraded extra challenges, which are just some things to think about how we could improve the server side a little bit more before we move on. But they're really just thought experiments. They're not really, you don't really have to implement anything. So I'll post that on Piazza as well. So that's all from me for today. I took the full 90 minutes, but this used to be 2 projects. I think it's a lot of plumbing. So hopefully you can get your database table showing and then get through the additional plumbing and get to implementing these API methods. And thanks everyone for listening. And unless you have anything else, Dr. K, I'll see everyone on Piazza.
Well, that sounds good. Have a great night, everyone.
Oh, Sushmitha, did you have a question? Sorry.
No, that was just a response to it.
Oh, okay. All right, everyone. Thank you. See you on Piazza.